Once again, it's time for the Yodobashi Top 10, and this time we're talking about April the 1st to April the 15th. Sony absolutely dominates, Canon sends their B team, and OM Systems, Panasonic, and Pentax, well, they don't bother to show up at all. Stay tuned, details coming up, but first, please do me a favor. Follow me on Twitter, subscribe, share, choose all notifications, like, comment, and all that good stuff. It's greatly appreciated, but most importantly, it really helps this channel grow. Yodobashi is Japan's 4th largest camera retailer, although they also sell other electronics, including computers. We like to cover Yodobashi because they regularly release their sales data. Don't live in Japan? Don't worry. This video is published simply to provide some camera content on an otherwise slow Sunday. Alright, so let's get right to the top 10, and unlike previous videos, I'm going to go right through this one. We're not going to stop, look at any B-roll, we're not going to reminisce about certain cameras or how certain cameras make us think. So with that in mind, well, let's go ahead right to our number 10th camera, and it's our Sony, our first of 5 Sony cameras, and it's a Sony A7C. In 9th place, we have a Nikon, the first of 2 Nikon cameras, the Nikon Z6 Mark II. Now the Nikon Z6 Mark II is currently on sale, $300 off at B&H, although I wouldn't be surprised if it's on sale at Adorama too. And if you use my link down below, it'll get you right to those cameras, so you can immediately start saving, although there are rumors that the Mark III is supposed to be coming out relatively soon. I know, I'm going off on a tangent. All right, let's get right to 8th place. And in 8th place, we have our second Sony of the evening. And it's a vlogging camera, and it's a Sony ZV, not E1. I think it's got a good set of specifications, but I don't know, I'm just not a big fan of this camera. The ZV camera that we have in 8th place, it's actually the ZV E10. And then we have our Canon camera, our first Canon camera of the evening in 7th place, and that's the Canon EOS R10 with the RFS 18-150mm image stabilized STM. Now there's no mention of the R7 in this top 10 in any way whatsoever. Canon was having trouble getting this camera out, and I don't know if that's the reason why it's not showing up, but it was released at the same time as the Canon EOS R10. All right, so we're ready to move up onto the list, see what surprises we have next. Well, in 6th place, we have another Sony, our 3rd Sony of the evening, and it's the Sony A7 IV, and this is a kit form, a separate SKU from the regular one with the body. The Sony A7 IV has been, well, a very popular camera. It sells for $24.99, and it was, well, started shipping back in, I think, December of 2021. And for much of 2022 on the Yodobashi Top 10, this camera's been pretty much in the top 3. So it's been doing very, very well. But in 5th place, we have our second Nikon of the evening. Can you guess which one it is? Yeah, of course, it's the Nikon Z9. Who said the Nikon Z7 Mark II? No, it's hardly ever been in the top 10 at all. It's been the Z6, or more or less the Nikon Z9, or I think the Z30 was in there once. But yeah, the Nikon Z9, the second and last of our Nikon cameras. All right, now let's head up to the 4th place. It's a Canon camera. Can you guess which one? Yep, it is the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, selling for $24.99, the same price as the Canon EOS R6 Mark I. So the Mark II is in the Mark II is in 4th place, and it's been doing very, very well. The biggest problem with this camera is, well, Canon being able to make enough of them to get it out so that you can purchase them. So the R6 Mark II fixes an awful lot of the video, well, complaints that we had about the camera. So now at $24.99, I think we've got a very solid camera. All right, now let's enter the top 3. Now in 3rd place, we have another Canon camera. And this camera was announced relatively recently. And no, it's not the R8, it's the Canon EOS R50. Selling for about $679, this is a really solid camera for this price point. I think it competes really well against the Sony ZV E10. But Canon's done some really nice things here. Instead of that cripple hammer coming out and just smashing this camera to pieces to where it's pretty much useless, they have segmented it. It has a single card slot, it doesn't have IBIS and stuff like that, but as an entry-level camera for somebody, $679, I think the R50 is a pretty good camera. And if you're looking at this camera, also take a look at the Sony ZV E10 side by side. I think both of these two cameras do compete pretty well with each other. All right, now let's move up to 2nd place. And in 2nd place, we have another Sony. Can you guess which one it is? No. Yes, that's correct. It's the Sony I was going to say ZV-E1. Sorry, this is what happens when you try to do everything in one take. You're going to have a few mistakes. No, it's not the Sony ZV-E1. It's the Sony a7R5, a camera that was announced in late, well, October, right? Just on the heels of the R6 Mark II, which was early November. And the camera's been doing quite well. It's been selling quite well. But who's in first place? I feel like I should get a drum roll here. Now, the camera that's in first place has been in first place many times at Yodobashi over 2022. It's the Sony a7R4. I said R4, didn't I? Not the R4. No, sorry. It's the Sony a7 IV. Now, I know I'm going to get a few comments on this saying, Simon, you already mentioned the a7 IV previously down below, and I did, but remember, we're talking SKUs. That's how Yodobashi does it. So the a7 IV kit, it has a different SKU, different box than the a7 IV body alone. And if you add the a7 IV and the a7 IV kit together, that would take the Sony a7 IV from first place to a little bit higher in first place. So this week, or the last 2 weeks, well, not the last 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of April, from April the 1st to April the 15th, Sony's dominated. I mean, it's got some really good full-frame cameras in the top 10. We don't see the a6400 in there this time. Sony's doing very, very well, and Canon's doing okay too. I mean, if you show up with 3 cameras in the top 10, it's not embarrassing. But notice how we're not seeing the R3 in the top 10. We're not seeing the R5 in the top 10. We're not seeing the 1DX Mark III. You're not seeing a lot of the heavy hitters. We're seeing more entry-level cameras like the R50, the R10, and the highest camera here is the R6 Mark II. So Canon's not doing as well. I'm wondering if all the talk, partly from this channel, on the R5 Mark II has a lot of people kind of wondering, well, maybe I'll wait a little bit, but the R5 is currently on sale at $200 off, and quite often we've seen this camera go for $400 off. And we just have to go back to Black Friday and we can see that the Canon EOS R5 has been on sale permanently since November the 25th of 2022. That's the longest I recall any camera being on sale, and that's interesting. When are we going to get the R5 Mark II? Well, the latest I heard was, well, we're probably going to get an announcement in the 4th quarter, and the camera's supposed to start shipping in early 2024. But that was a couple of months ago, and still we're seeing delays caused by many various different reasons, so I wouldn't be surprised if it does get pushed, but we're definitely within less than 12 months for an announcement of the Canon EOS R5. So this time around, I consider this to be quite boring. I was actually just going to tweet this. I wasn't going to cover it off because I thought, well, there's really nothing earth-shattering here. We don't have any new cameras. And yes, Sony does dominate, which is why I led with the thumbnail. But there's no surprises from Sony. There's no surprises from Canon. We're not seeing the Panasonic S5 Mark II here. We didn't get any new announcements from them. So it's just kind of boring. But then I was, sitting downstairs. I was working on some other stuff. And I kind of thought, well, you know what? It's cold. It's rainy. It's a beautiful spring day. I mean, everything's turning green. And I thought, well, what else should I do? I thought I could clean the house, and I did do some of that. And I thought, yeah, I could do some more cleaning, or I could do something creative, and so that's what I'm doing. And I also had to reattach the camera because I was out doing some karate. I was testing. Do you remember that conversation I had about the Canon RF 100 to 300 millimeter f2.8 and how I really wanted that lens? Well, afterwards, things kind of settled in with me a little bit, and based on some of the conversations that I had with the comments, I thought, well, you know what, the 70 to 200 f2.8 makes more sense. And so I looked at purchasing that, and I've got some good leads lined up on that. But then I thought, well, wait a minute here. I've got the RF 100 millimeter f2.8. It's 2.8. It's only 100. It's a prime. So I took that with me today I took that with me today with my son to his karate, and I lined it up. I tested the exposure, and most of the times I was shooting between f3 to f4.5. Sometimes it would drop down to f2.8 to give me that perfect exposure, but I was pretty happy with it. So he's got his contest where he goes for his orange belt, and this is coming up in just a couple of days. Not enough time to even get the lens shipped out to me. So I'm going to go ahead and shoot with the 100 millimeter f2.8. So that's kind of what I'm using as an option right now. And the nice thing about that option, it puts a couple of grand back in my pocket, and it kind of has me waiting to see what's going to happen with DJI and the Mavic 3 Pro. Not the Mavic 3 that's been out for a couple of years, but the Mavic 3 Pro I'm really curious to see where this goes because I've got the old Mavic Pro and it's really starting to show its age. Even when I look at old footage that I used to think was very detailed and looked really, really good, I now look at it and go like, yeah, that's not so good. So 2 years with the Canon EOS R5 and makes the Mavic Pro just look like it was, you know, a 10-year-old camera. So I'm curious to see about that. Plus, I'm also saving up my money. I've got funding set aside for the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS 1. So I'm really looking forward to picking up those two cameras. And of course, I might still get the 70-200 f2.8 because I think when I'm shooting indoors, as my son gets older, there's an awful lot of shooting inside schools. There's no way I'm going to afford the 100-300 millimeter. And I think that 70-200 f2.8 is going to work. Somebody suggested I go with the f4, but I know my low light venues and schools, they're notorious for poor lighting, especially when I turn off some of the lights so that you can see the projected screen. And even in karate. So I find that f4 is certainly not enough. f2.8 should work most of the time. So yeah, the 70-200 is probably what I'm going to end up getting. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and choose all notifications so that way you can stay up to date on all my latest news and rumors. And by choosing all notifications, you will get an email from YouTube. Just make sure that you check your junk mail and spam folder because sometimes those end up in there. And for all the minor news and rumors, the kind of stuff that, well, isn't big enough to have its own separate video, like the Yodobashi Top 10 was this week. This really should have been just a tweet, but like I said, I get a little bit bored on the weekends. There's nothing to create. I don't have a big review to do like I did last week? Yeah, last week with the Angelbird CF Express Type A, the 1 terabyte. That's about a fourth the price of the competition. So I had not much to do, and I thought, you know, it only takes about 10 or 15 minutes to record this video, so why not go ahead and do this? So thank you so much for tuning in. But yeah, if you want to, for all those other videos, minor news and rumors that aren't big enough to have their own separate video, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Ordinary Filmmaker. But that's it for now. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.